Hello and welcome to another book discussion in our IndigiLit series. This series is meant to highlight books and other works by Indigenous authors. And today we will be discussing a book of short stories called Sweetgrass Burning, Stories from the Rez by Barbara Robidoux. So before we get into it, let's introduce ourselves. My name is Marissa and I work in the outreach department at the library.
Hi, everybody. Bonjour. My name is Ariel Ojibway, Ariel Ojibway Indiginicas, Ajijek Indudum, and Bawating Indudaba. And I have been introducing myself like that in the series for a little bit, but I feel like I just never talked about that, or maybe I did at the beginning. So I just want to share. And if you wanted to also say hi is bonjour. And you can also say Ani. And then usually one would say their name first, and then you say Indiginicas. So that's a little something. The other part is Crane Clan, and my tribe is the Sault Ste. Marie one. So who else is here this morning?
I'm Emily.
Oh, go ahead, Emily.
Okay, I'll bust right in. I'm Emily. I'm a librarian here at AADL.
I'm Valerie. I'm a clerk in the collections department.
I'm Elizabeth, and I'm a library technician in the archives at the library.
I'm Krista, and I'm a desk clerk for the library.
Does everyone want to try it? Come on, try and say either bonjour or Ani.
Can you remind me again? So bonjour is hello or hi?
Yeah.
And then what is Ani?
They're both hello.
Oh,
yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Does one have a different tone? So like one is more casual, like hi versus hello, or?
I feel like bonjour is like kind of more formal.
Okay.
But that's just my feeling. I don't know that at all. Well, yeah. Today we're reading Sweetgrass Burning, which is by Barbara Robidoux or Doe. We don't know for sure. And it's Stories from the Rez. And we don't know which Rez, but we have some clues that we could talk about later or now. But it's mostly set in Maine, and Maine is the place of the Wabanaki people, the Dawnland people, and that's 4 groups. It's the Passamaquoddy and the Penobscots, which are mostly in this, and then the Micmac and the Maliseet. And they're all part of the Algonquin group that kind of like hugs Michigan from the top through Canada. So yeah, so I don't really know what it sounds like to say hello in those languages, but they are Algonquin languages, so could be similar. I don't know. But I was wondering if you could tell me what your process of reading this book was like, because I feel like mine was different than other books. So yeah, anybody want to talk about that?
Jump in. I was a little surprised by this book. And part of it is, it looks very different from a lot of the books we've read before. If you look at it, it's a light paperback, you open it, the print is pretty large. And by being a collection of sort of interrelated short stories, that's also a little bit different. But what I kind of found as I was reading it is, I'm trying to choose my words properly here. It felt more like an early draft of a book and less of one that got as much editing attention, which made me quickly have to switch how I approached reading it. And instead kind of read it for the stories themselves and not get as in with well, what do I think this means? Let me relish in the words that are used for this. And once I did that flip in my mind, I found that I was enjoying it more when I was just kind of along for the ride. And I did try to look up to see if I could find more about this author, to find out if maybe she was an oral storyteller, because I'm wondering if maybe that was some of the struggle in translation for me, was from something that would be spoken to something that's written on the page as far as pacing goes. But I would have loved to read a version of this book that had gotten a little more attention from an editor. That being said, the parts that I felt it was the strongest at was like the actual meat of what the stories were, which is part of why I wanted more, because you could see the potential of what it could be if she only worked with someone who maybe spent a little more time creating stories for the written book. So that's my take on it.
Does anybody else? I'm just gonna say I felt similarly. Yes. And then I was like, is it, am I just having that feeling? But then there was one place for sure, in the building of the pier, that the like time frame was switched a little. And so I was like, okay, no, it's editing, but it's not in here so much. But then again, like, we're comparing things that were like written by Pulitzer Award winning authors. So I felt similarly, but I'm really glad that we are like trying the universe of writers out here. And yeah, and I also was like at the beginning, I was like short stories, not connected. And then they're sort of connected. And then I feel like halfway through, where like when is it? I feel like halfway through it sort of turns into like, what, am I a novel now? Like like a plot thickens and things begin to happen mostly for one person. Yeah. And it kind of turns into like a little, not really, but like a little bit of a murder mystery. And then like the three old ladies solving murder mysteries, like Agatha Christie or something, except, it wasn't a murder that they were solving. Did anyone else feel, I don't know, something like that?
I felt similarly to both of what you've already said. I kind of missed the original characters like from the first half, because it kind of transitions to like a different group of characters, even though they all know each other. But I was like, oh, I wonder what's happening with those people that we didn't come back to. But a lot of the stories, like even though they maybe like as a written story, it needed maybe some editing in some places, but it felt like someone from a small town telling you a story that they remember. So some of the errors like just seem like memory errors. They don't necessarily, like, it felt kind of fine to me also, especially when they got to like the old ladies, the Snoop sisters. It just seemed like you're just hearing gossip from people. Like, and I really liked that. It felt really like the book as a whole felt like being in a small town to me, of just like hearing people's random little bits of gossip. And I like gossip, so I liked
Yeah, I definitely enjoyed it. Like there was definitely a lot of stuff that could have been more refined in editing. And I think a lot of that is that it's a small publishing imprint. Like I think she did it herself, from what I could find. So, I mean, it's a great effort on her part to like create this whole book with very little resources, it seems, and to have such a great, compelling story. I agree with Marissa. Like, it felt very, at the end, like a whole story, and you get to know all these characters and you see their interconnections, and it was fun. It's a fun read.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what everybody said before. Like Emily mentioned, like oral storytelling, Marissa mentioned gossip, and that's kind of how it felt to me. Like someone was talking to me, either catching me up on the local gossip or like writing me letters. And that's kind of why the voice sort of went back and forth. But in a way it made it more personal, I guess. And I have a friend who grew up on a reservation, so I also had in the back of my mind, like wondering if he grew up in similar circumstances, I guess, and what it was like for him. So that made it like, it just added this extra element of interest to me.
So speaking of the like really familiar feeling parts, there were little tidbits in there that like really, yeah, brought me down to earth, like grounded me, like, whoa, I am at this person's table. Or things that I was like, I think I know it's a fictional place, but I think this is a real place. And so I do want to talk a little bit about that. And I also do feel like, Emily, you said earlier, like if it had like a little more, like I feel like it really could be turned into like a real like novel murder mystery. Oh, with the Francis sisters snooping around, like that'd be really fun. I would love that. So like some little details were the oil, the pattern, floral patterned oil cloths, like oil tablecloths. Does anybody know like what that? Oh my gosh. It's like when I was little, growing up in Vermont, that was like the picnic tablecloth that came out everywhere, or like in older ladies' houses. It's like, feels like that vinyl or something that you wipe down. It's the oil. And I was just like, whoosh. I went there and there was like potato salad and like iced tea. And yeah, just really up in that. And like, gotta go to the Super Saver for potatoes, like got some up north feels too. Anybody getting those things?
Yeah, I like what you said, Marissa, about like small town gossip. Like I grew up in a sort of small town, and it just makes me think of like, that one bar in town that never changes over decades, and you see the same people sitting behind the bar, and you maybe hear the same stories over and over again. I really like that idea of looking at this book, especially in its current form, as someone just sitting and talking to you, because those little familiar details that you were talking about, Ariel, like those are what bring you into it. And I think that was why I had such a frustrating time reading this book, is because I could see so much potential for it. Like it made me, part of my job here that I love is that I get to work with our press. And it reminded me a lot of reading an initial pitch. Where you can see that hope for what's to come, but it hasn't quite, it needs some tools to get there. But one of the nice things about, I also like you did, Elizabeth, did a little bit of research into the press, and it does look like it is like a one-woman show who runs the press. So in that case, then it's two gals who are working to do this. But the nice thing about it being a more self-published thing is that it does, if some more conventional publisher wanted to turn it into something, they could. So I don't know. I have no idea what this author, because she doesn't have a huge online presence, what her plans are. But it's neat to think of this as maybe not the end product, whether it really is or isn't.
On the other hand, I know the one thing I did know about her was that she was a poet. And sometimes I struggle reading poets' prose because they have that poetry, like flowery, let me describe this table in a whole paragraph, when really it's like a table with a tablecloth, and like that's fine. And so like I tried to find some of her poems. I couldn't find a whole lot of them, but I don't know. I also really kind of like the simple prose. Like it felt like just, people talking to me. And it didn't seem overly flowery, or I don't know. It felt very accessible. which I liked.
I enjoyed the stories just for the stories themselves. I didn't do a lot of research into the author, but I did spend an inordinate long period of time with the Google map trying to figure out like, oh, they're talking about this place. Okay, they're talking about this. Oh, look, this whirlpool actually exists. Stuff like that. I must have spent, good half hour, 45 minutes looking at the map and then going back to it from time to time.
I did the exact same thing. That was like, I guess when you asked Ariel, like, what was your process in reading it? That was like what I immediately thought. It was like, my process was staring at a Google map for a really long time.
Wait, okay. So tell me some of the detective work for both of you, because I thought it was fun. Because at first I was reading it and just like, okay, now like I feel no, this is a real place. And then I was like, okay, so Calais is north. Okay, I'm just trying to feel it. But then pretty soon I was like, gotta get Google open, and then gotta look up the reservations, and then yeah. So what were some of your landmarks? Or I mean, the Old Sow was one of them. So, and I can't believe it exists. Yeah.
The first thing was, I think in like the very beginning, she mentioned the bay. I can't pronounce it, but she mentions the bay, and then she starts mentioning like other surrounding towns. So I was like, there's the bay, like I get the general region. And then as she starts mentioning other things, I'm like, oh, that's there. Oh, that's right there. That's there. And then the Old Sow, like everything's there. This is a real place.
Yeah, anytime a town was mentioned, I would Google where the town was to try to see like where they're going. And I've been to Maine before. I had a friend who lived there, and so I visited her a few times. And so like I had some reference of like I've seen the tide that is, a huge change over like instead of the little tides that other places get. And so like I had some frame of reference for it, but yeah, I was really enjoying the Google mapping.
Okay, well, I'm just gonna take a stab at it and say, I think it's the Passamaquoddy Pleasant Point Reservation. And then, was anybody else up in their Wikipedia? No? Okay.
Tell us what you learned.
Oh, thank you for asking. I learned something that is maybe not that fun, but is kind of like endemic to many reservations, and kind of actually has to do with a recent Supreme Court case. Kind of, not really, kind of. So the Passamaquoddy Water District is where people there get their water, which is like it doesn't have anything to do with the tribe. It's I don't know what a municipal corporation is, but that's what it is. And it's run by like trustees and an independent executive person. And the problem essentially is that the reservoir that they get water from is 10 feet deep. So as you can imagine, like algae and a lot of microbial things grow there. And then they have to treat it with a bunch of chlorine. And then after the chlorinated process, are you ready for some science word? Trihalomethylene is the problem that's there. And they've been finding 3 to 4 times the EPA's maximum contaminant level since the 70s, and 77, 81, 2005, 2017, 18, and 19. They found that. And they started testing after the Safe Water Drinking Act, and problems about trihalomethylene in your water, or methane in your water, are that it causes liver damage and central nervous system depression. And, some studies suggest that it could be carcinogenic. So water problems, essentially. And then sort of like maybe we were wondering how contentious are these things with the next door neighboring town that is mentioned sometimes in the book. but it said in 2014, the tribe tried to dig a well on their own land in Perry, Maine. So, or the town of Perry, who then passed an ordinance limiting the well's use. And then in 2020, they tried to dig a well for their elementary school, and state regulations prevented it. And don't worry, though, they were allowed to dig a hand well for people to get some clean water to drink. So anyway, that's something that I found from Wikipedia. So, do your due diligence if you want to get out there. But yeah, resources, natural resources, access to just like basic life things is a thing on many, not all, reservations. And I could keep just going down my lecture hole. I'll just say that, do you all know about the Supreme Court case with the Navajo Nation recently? Okay, I see some nods. So can anybody else do just a little smidgen instead of me continuing? Or not? Okay, yeah, it's a Supreme Court case, so who knows what they're actually talking about. But essentially, it seems to me that the Navajo Nation has been trying for a long time, maybe since the 70s or maybe before, to get the government to say exactly what its water rights are. And it hasn't been clear. And water issues, have been more and more and more of a thing in the Western states. And in the Navajo Nation, like 30% of people don't have running water in their homes, and they just either go to a place and fill up tanks, or sometimes it gets distributed to their homes. There's a really cute children's book. I think it's called The Water Lady, and it's illustrated by like a really great artist. I think his name is Shanto Begay, and pronunciation. But anyway, yeah, they get water distributed to their homes. And so the outcome of the court case was like, hey, you're taking up the Colorado River. We don't have water. Maybe you should be responsible for that in some way. And the people who said no were like, the United States does not owe you like water infrastructure. That's not our job. That wasn't part of the agreement. And the people who dissented were like, what they're saying is that like we agreed that this could be their homeland, and you can't have a homeland without water. So if you keep on taking away their access to water because upstream you're diverting it and polluting it, then you kind of took away a homeland because they can't live there. So that's what happened. Anyway, the resolution was like, that's your problem. You're welcome for my water lecture.
That was much better than the one sentence I had. So thank you.
Thank you for listening.
But I did, one thing that struck me in the book was when they were talking about the natural gas plant, just because, speaking of environmental issues, like that the tribe is sort of being forced to choose between having money and jobs or having this natural gas plant that no one wants because it'll potentially like ruin everything, where there's tankers carrying natural gas, the waters are like rocky, and there's obviously a whirlpool, and that would like be hard to navigate, and there would be worry about contamination or explosions, and just how that's like a common thing that marginalized groups are forced to like choose between having money to eat or ruining your environment. So it just, there's a lot of little tidbits in this book like that wasn't talked a whole lot about, but these little tidbits cropped up and I appreciated. Like it felt very like fully complete little window into how life is. So I appreciated that.
Yeah, all of those helped to set it in the real world. Like, obviously, we're looking at the map, we've kind of put things together. It is interesting to think about how much, I mean, you always kind of debate this when you're reading a novel, like how much of this is actually the author and the author's life. That it was interesting before we hit record, Elizabeth, you pointed out that Dous is a main character for the beginning of the book, at least. And maybe, I mean, we aren't entirely sure how the author's last name is pronounced, but could it be an author stand-in? And I think like it very well could be. And if it is, and again, these are making major leaps here, so these are just presumptions, but that could also be a reason why it's connected, but not novel short stories, but you could almost think of it as being a collection of personal essays. But because you are dealing with all that good small town gossip, I can very much understand wanting to stand behind the protection of a novel and to be able to take those creative leaps. But it did make me think, we talked a little bit about the three Snoop sisters, but like I wanted a whole book of them. That was my favorite part of the book, was watching like the interactions between these older ladies, and then also their determination to like solve this mystery, whether or not it changed any stakes. But it really did make me wonder, like, oh, I hope these are based on whether they're really sisters or not, or whether there's really three of them. Like I can see some of the older women that I know falling into that role. And I hope that somewhere in Maine that a version of these ladies really exist.
Can we talk about poisoning the next town over? Anyone?
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, when they used X-Lax for like, and then another character later on, I think it might be like the granddaughter of one of the Snoop sisters, like does the same thing. And I thought that was really funny because it was like she didn't know them, but she did the same thing as them.
Yeah, I was like, Greg, old man who's like reading the waters and like speaks to the whales and ancestors, is just casually like, what if we poison them? And I love how for a minute you're like, what does he mean? Marissa, what were you gonna say?
Just the fact that they specifically mentioned that it was LSD also, which I assume is then what old Greg had put in the pitcher of Kool-Aid. I'm like, where is this old man getting a pitcher of LSD laced Kool-Aid? Like, I don't know. That whole chapter had me just howling with laughter. So I was a fan.
Did anyone do any Googling to find out if that part feels pretty made up? But like, I do kind of want to start looking for those small town newspaper articles, because it would get coverage, to see if it's based on, even loosely based on truth.
I think it mentions too, like it was covered, like in the story, it was covered in the newspaper the next day. So gotta break out my archival skills and look into that.
If you find anything, report back.
I will.
I found that particular part of the story to be a lot of fun, but I also thought of it as like, the other town burned down their bingo hall. So this was kind of a way to get revenge without real violence. I mean, you can kind of say they had some violence, but it was kind of like an eye for an eye type thing, is the way I saw it.
I don't know about eye for eye. I feel like eye for like end of your pinky nail, because they used their like forests and a whole bunch of like blueberry land or something as collateral for building that bingo hall, and they were gonna but didn't destroy their like haunted bog or like whatever we're gonna call that place. So I assume that they also lost all their forest and everything too. So yeah, first when Greg was like, we're gonna poison them, I was like, whoa, this is going so much darker than I thought. And like they they're not, this isn't that kind of book, is it? But then, yeah, then you're like, oh, ha ha ha. They like, everyone in the church was tripping, I guess, and then having diarrhea. So it's, yeah, that sucks, but it is pretty funny. And I thought there were some other good humorous moments too. Did anyone stick out? Because yeah, I had some that I was just like, oh, I like that. My one that like comes to mind immediately is the gambling when the bingo hall did burn down at the end of that chapter. Sometimes I feel like, yeah, her poeticism comes through in these little zingy one-liners, which was like, well, they couldn't do it in the bingo hall anymore, so people moved over to St. Anne's because people feel comfortable. They feel secure gambling in the basement of a church. And I was like, oh, that's funny. Did you get some humor other places?
It's funny, but it's not funny. The fact that they said it burned down because a seagull flew into the like fryer or the exhaust thing kind of made me giggle. Even though I was like, it's funny, but it's not funny. I feel bad for the seagull, but
Yeah, I feel like a lot of the humor was dark, which is kind of my thing. So I don't know. I liked the fact that like you find out later that Molly, is that her name? Like cursed Bonnie. And like that comes to light and you're like, oh, that was kind of funny, but also dark.
okay, another dark moment. This is not funny. It's not funny, but it is. The priest who's just like, who had an affair with Molly, who seems like he's kind of just terrible. He's back to like do a blessing, and he's doing like a healing thing, which is weird because I thought that he was like Catholic, and then I was like, do Catholics do this? It seemed weird.
Oh, they do them.
He touches Susie on the head and she like falls down dead. And it just like, it felt right, but also like, I don't know, it was funny, but not funny. Poor Susie, but.
No, it was hilarious. That was hilarious. And then it said it caused him to question his priestly abilities.
If that's the first thing that made him question it and not some of his prior behaviors, I don't know. Like Susie was old. Maybe she was giving her life for a good cause there.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of the like Christians, like the outside the res, kind of got their comeuppance a little bit. Because like I feel like spiking Kool-Aid with LSD at a fundamentalist picnic is just like, that's perfect. Because that would really get him, I think, where it hurt. And then also, yeah, the priest essentially doing the opposite of healing someone. That was just like, it got him where it hurt, I guess. And that's what I got from like kind of the interactions with the Christian groups.
I think that must be part of the darkness. The like, ooh, it's a little too close. Another like funny, not funny was the moose. So I'm not gonna lie, when they hit the moose, the first thing I thought, considering the beginning of the book, I was like, they're eating for the whole winter. Like they have enough to put in their freezer. And then it was a tragedy. But then I loved how like Molly Paul back from the grave over and out reports in, and like the second sentence she was like, all right, we're having dinner. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad that they said that out loud and it wasn't just me.
Well, it's one of those things where the bad thing happened. So you should probably take the good that came along with it because it doesn't change things. So it just seems very practical.
Speaking of bad things happening, the last book we read had death in every chapter. Well, every short story, at least one. And then this book also starts off with death at the beginning and death at the end. And I noticed that, I mean, it starts with the tribal chairman, but really the big centering deaths are moms. So the first person isn't Deuce's mother, but she's essentially her mother because she steps up and is like her adoptive mother, really, and takes care of her. And then at the end, the birth mother to someone passes away. And so that was something I noticed. And it also made me think of the title a little bit. I don't know if it brought thoughts of that to anybody.
In the like very end, it mentions that the house is burning, Molly's house is burning, and her daughter was like living there. And she comes back and the whole house is on fire, and her collection of sweetgrass that she's had through like her whole life that she brings new stuff in every year is burning, and the whole town smells like it. So that was the ending. And I felt like that was significant, and it was like a culmination of her whole life just like releasing. But it wasn't framed in like a super negative way. It was kind of like a positive, uplifting thing, I read it as.
I think that it's good for us to see death not just as a negative thing, because it's part of the cycle. So I was not able to join last month, so I didn't read the book, but I think there is something with death being a prominent feature, but not necessarily something that weighs down a story, that I think is good for us as readers and as human beings to kind of just let it be a part of things. And I don't know if there's a link with that with other things that we've read with this book, but I think it's a very a healthy way to look at things. And so like the fact that it ends with death and burning, but not in a way that feels like the world or the book is crumbling down around you is meaningful.
And I felt like Molly's death ultimately fulfilled her wishes of what she wanted for her daughter. She wanted her daughter to know her. And then there was a lot of confusion of like, people in the reservation saying, well, she's one of us, she needs to stay here. And of course, she doesn't really feel a connection to these people. So having the house burn down, I felt like was freeing her. It gave her a way to continue her life as it was, because, well, now she doesn't have a place to live. So I'm not going to say like necessarily the house burning was like spiritual influence, but it almost felt that way because it fulfilled that for her daughter.
There's also a lot about like who belongs and like what is family and what is community. Like at the very beginning, Deuce doesn't have like blood relatives, but she obviously has a lot of people in the community who kind of take care of her, like Peg and old Greg and the town leader. They're talking about that. And then obviously Molly had given her daughter up for adoption, and they specifically say that it wasn't like a paper adoption, that it was just an agreement between two women who had trust between each other. And then like when her daughter comes, like there's this whole town discussion about like who's going to take care of her and who's going to act as her family. And there's another part where old Greg was talking about the whales and how they used to live on land, but then they missed the sea, so they went back to the sea. And there's a beached whale, and they treat it like a relative, and they bury it in their cemetery, which is like who is part of the community, and they take the whale as part of them. And the Catholic priest, of course, is mad. And they're like, this is our burial ground, not yours. Like, you're never going to be buried here, so get out of here. So like they're drawing that line of like, a whale is one of us, but this priest is not one of, like, you're not one of us, which was like satisfying to read.
I obviously read that part, and heard it and thought, like bring you home. But until you just said like drawing a line, a whale is one of us and you are not. get out of here. I just hadn't really like felt it that way. So thanks for saying it like that.
I think also Kateri, is that, I'm not sure how you say it, but Molly's daughter lives in, what state does she live in? She lives in like one of the western states, I feel like.
New Mexico.
New Mexico. And she has been adopted by the community there. So like she feels more at home in that community, even though she knows she doesn't look like them because she looks like the people in the north. So she feels like a part of their community, also somewhat of an outsider. So she's kind of like stuck in between these two worlds. And she has trouble navigating that. I don't know if it's really fully resolved, but like I think the house burning is kind of a little bit of a resolution.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, Valerie.
No, that's okay. I was just going to say, I appreciated the scene where Molly tried to go to New Mexico to meet her daughter and everything, and that Juanita was like, why are you choosing now to, get to know your daughter? You've had 16 years, why now? Why are you going to just come in and mess up her life? And that was refreshing to see, rather than glossing over that conflict. And in the end, Molly went back to the north, which is good. You had that option of raising your child and you chose to give her up for adoption. Why come back and complicate her life? It'd be one thing if she had like stayed in touch and been like, saw her, Kateri saw her as like an aunt or something. But she didn't. So I appreciated the scene with Juanita telling her that, because a lot of stories would have just kind of glossed that over.
And I like how Molly took it. Molly was just really practical, straightforward person in a lot of ways. Except with maybe cursing Bonnie, but she said she didn't mean to do it like that bad. And yeah, like with going there, she's like, all right, come and meet my daughter. Might as well just like fly here. This is my last paycheck. Can I take my daughter back? And her daughter's mom is like, no, what? And then she was like, my bad. You know what? You're probably, but good. Thanks for having that talk. I'm outie. And I appreciate that she could take that criticism and like let it sink in. And then it did. She reflected like, oh, I feel lonely here. I don't really know anybody. How would my daughter feel in this new place where she doesn't know anybody? And I also felt like the house burning was not bad, or somebody said spiritual resolution. And yeah, I feel like that's what it was, especially in combination with the dream of her mom, like dragging her to the swamp to be like, come on, you have to like pull sweetgrass with me. We need to make these sweetgrass braids. And she's like, I don't like water. I don't like this. I don't want to do that. And so that really definitely felt like the mom being like, stay here, you are part of this, and her being like, I'm uncomfy, and then being released from it. I was also thinking, so I don't know if you remember braiding sweetgrass, and what Sweetgrass's story is. Do you, Elizabeth? What is it?
It was like a gift from the creation story. And one of the, like, was it the hair of the creation? What's her name?
It's Mother Earth's hair, but in the story, yeah, her is it the grandma or the mom? I think mom gets buried and it's her hair. But I think Sky Woman comes down she has her daughter. Her daughter passes away. She buries her daughter. The heartberries and the sweetgrass and corn and stuff. But hair, Sweetgrass's Mother Earth's hair. And it's like smudge is more, it's like a gentle smudge kind of thing. And I don't know, it was mentioned in the first part with the first mom, and then again when they hit the moose, they brought out the sweetgrass that the V or something was driving, and she had a sweetgrass braid in the car that she did with her daughter. And then it fell onto her lap, and it like kind of, I feel like it helped her like revive. And then at the end, the Sweetgrass Burning is also like sort of a release of the daughter. And this is really way too far and deep, but I'm gonna go there. The Sweetgrass Burning, Mother Earth hair burning, big metaphor at the beginning, like their snowy owls come, and you know the owls are like an omen of death, and then like throughout there's the bingo hall but like traded for the swamplands, and there's the forest and everything, and there's the pier and the gas line, and how the waters are upset about like disrespecting them that way. And then old Greg says more than once, like, and at the end he particularly says like, we're going to be gone, the waters are coming up over us, and you can already see like that island and that island went away already, so it's rising. And I just feel like there's something there about like human extraction, people, world, Mother Earth's hair burning. Probably too much of a metaphor, but like I'm taking that. And since we're talking about moms, unless anybody else wants to say anything about the book in particular, then I'm going to go slightly off subject, but not too far, and just bring up another Supreme Court decision, the Indian Child Welfare Act, which this time was a choice upheld in the favor of tribes. And just a little bit of Indian Child Welfare Act. Should I tell you about it? Okay. Okay. Well, with the Night Watchman, we were talking about like termination of the tribes program and relocation, and trying to just take families and get them off reservations and into cities and everything. And I assume that we all know about the boarding schools, that kids were sometimes voluntarily given to, but often forcibly taken to and deposited at over and over. But then they actually had some third-party people who were like, but you know, those schools aren't great. So the next thing that they decided to do was the Indian Adoption Project, next step of assimilation. So the schools weren't okay, so they made a real project to adopt Native kids out to white families. And like with the boarding schools, when they would send them hundreds of miles away, so again, they weren't on their territory, they focused on sending Native children from Western states to Eastern states, just far away. Yeah, and it was like the 50s and 60s, so like around termination, right after termination, and then through the 60s, and then it had a different name later up into the 70s. But social workers and everything were very much looking for like nuclear families, and white nuclear families with water running into their homes and you know, other things like that. And if they didn't meet whatever, sometimes probably good, but other arbitrary restrictions, social workers just took away their children and either put them in foster homes or adopted them out. And then at one point, they realized people kept objecting and bringing this up, and a study was done, and about 25 to 35% of Native children were living in placements with non-Native people outside of their homes. And there were some people who there were some tribes in Minnesota and Alaska who didn't have any children because they were taken away. This is from the More Perfect podcast. And it's a good one. I'm just repeating this here. But yeah, so eventually with a bunch of lobbying, in 1974, the Indian Child Welfare Act was passed, which was in a bunch of communities, children were being taken away, and like grandmas and aunts and everybody was like, hey, why are you just taking them all the way across the country or to another culture entirely when we're here and we're asking to take care of our children and we want to? And the whole community was like, well, they should be here with us. And obviously, if you just take someone's children and assimilate them, you lose your culture, like was happening with the boarding schools, like was happening with termination, like was happening with genocide. So yeah, so that was passed in 1974, and it was a really good thing for helping families and tribes and communities be able to stay together. And that was what was being fought recently in the Supreme Court, and worked out. So that's really good. And also for tribal sovereignty and everything, that's really good, because that was part of it, tribes being able to make those choices about where their citizens were going. Yeah. Sorry, another rant.
Great to hear some good news coming out of the Supreme Court.
Yes, thank you. Yes, it is.
And I think one of the benefits of this book club is to get to learn, get maybe started by something that you read in fiction, but then to see how it is paralleled in real life. And I know I've said this in previous iterations of these, but the learning we were given in school on this was very lacking. So it's a shame that I'm filling in these gaps in my 30s, but I appreciate you stepping up, because even if it's something I've heard once before, it's good to hear again, because that's how you learn it more permanently.
And I appreciate being able to learn these things too, because like I heard stories around from like communities or things that I read, or people that were always like, you gotta hide the children, like put them under the bed, or like tell them to run into the woods or whatever. And I, like, growing up, assumed that was just from boarding school times. And it didn't really occur to me, it didn't occur to me. And I just was learning, like reading about I didn't know social workers into like the 70s had the power to just be like, no, I don't like the conditions of what you're doing with these children. I'm making the decision for the rest of their life. And so that makes sense, because like, probably many of us have parents or uncles and aunts and everything who were alive then. So it makes sense that stories were ubiquitous about people being like, no, hide the children. And I'm grateful that being nervous about these talks sometimes lets me go down researchy rabbit holes. So thanks.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Ariel, for facilitating. Thank you, everyone, for watching and joining us, and we will see you next time.